Tom Khazoyan needs no introduction. Just kidding. Works with. Can I say?
Huh?
Can I say?
You can say.
Okay. He works with Pioneers.
Pioneers.
Yep. Okay.
10X
Good.
Productions, International Media Ministries.
And he and Clyde and a couple of other people, Jim Green, I think, work with the Mobile Ministry Mission Media U University. So, but I'm sure you'll talk about that. Thanks.
Okay. Well, it's good to be here, and it's so fun to have a flexible, organic schedule. I love that. The title of my keynote is Developing an Integrated Media Strategy, and that's a very academic, kind of highfalutin kind of sounding thing, and so I have some alternative names for it that I'll work on here a little bit. But what this comes out of, I'm a 30-plus year filmmaker. My background is a professional filmmaker. I've done everything from TV commercials to feature films in all sorts of roles. And so I'm a storyteller at heart. But what's been interesting to me is the kind of a shift that I've experienced in the last, 10 years or so, that a lot of us have been experiencing in the storytelling world, in the media world. And I think I've really become a different kind of a storyteller over the last 10 years. There was a time when, I was just out shooting in the wilds of places like Tatarstan, and I do training in Turkey, and I do online training and things. And what I found is there's this convergence of new media and storytelling that has become a really exciting thing for me. It can be a challenge to make the leap for some of us, and some of us like to remain on sort of one side or the other, but I found a really exciting integration of that. The ministries that I'm working on, and like the course that I teach with Mission Media U, and the people I engage with now, are involved in something different than traditional media kinds of things, where as I'm a filmmaker, I'm thinking of making something for entertainment. I want to reach a wide audience, but it's primarily for entertainment, maybe a little bit of enlightenment or something like that. But what we are talking about when I'm interacting with church planters and people like that, and a lot of you, what you are interested in on the field is not something minor happening in a person's life. It is what we call high-level conversion. And I like to think of it in pictures. I like to think of it as I think about friends that I know. And these are four guys from Diyarbakir in Turkey. The guy on the left is Orkun, and the one in the, I forget the third guy. He's a school teacher. Uzgur and Umer on the far right. And these represent what we think about as we're thinking about high-level conversion. And the phrase that I like is this idea of changing imagination. We know that in any culture, people tend to think that what they are is what they are, and they can't be anything else, right? To be Turkish is to be Muslim, to be Cambodian is to be Buddhist, to be this is to be this. And they don't know anybody else, they've never seen anybody else who is different from them. Therefore, what we're encouraging them toward and nurturing them toward is a process of changing the imagination of what they could be. And three of these guys represent a former Sufi. He was a fundamentalist Muslim, became a Sufi mystic, followed that. Uzgur in the middle was a drug dealer, drug addict living on the streets. And Umar, the guy on the far right, was involved in Hezbollah through his brother and things like that. These guys are Kurds and Turks. And what this represents to me when I see a picture like this is this transformation. Kurds and Turks hanging out together, Kurds and Turks following Jesus together. It's a completely different sort of a thing that we can imagine. What we want to do, what I'm trying to figure out how to do in the ministry we do, is how to integrate the kinds of things, the tools we have in the business world, social media world, and things like that related to storytelling. And I teach storytelling, I teach screenwriting and things like that. And one thing we know is that stories are very effective at drawing in audiences. They're good at stirring up ideas. Story is a very hot, sexy thing in the business world. You want everybody storying everything, right? But the thing that I want to pitch to you today is that your story doesn't really matter. And the subtitle is, "And Other Discouraging Lessons for Filmmakers Like Me." Okay? So you're going to hear Clyde totally pitch you on story. And Craig's going to totally pitch you on story, right? So and I teach stories. But let me teach, I want to explain from my own failure I think it's really important for us to share our failures and embrace our failures. Okay, that's a lot of where I'm coming from these days. Hopefully, I don't fail all the time in like an absolute sense, but it's at least a cautionary tale. And about 10 years ago at this time, we were just wrapping production on a feature film in the Amazon. An audacious project, an indigenous film with an entirely indigenous cast, shot in the jungle, 8 weeks of filming. It was quite an audacious project, really a God-sized kind of a thing that we had felt called to. And I was producing, and I was the editor and did all the post-production on it and brought in a writer-director and things. And so the film's called The Enemy God. Won some awards in some film festivals, showed around in some festivals, well regarded by people who saw it. However, very few people, compared with what we had envisioned at the beginning when we started thinking about a film like this, saw it. It had relatively little distribution, and so it felt like we failed in some way. It felt like we just were obedient to God, and we tried to do this thing that we learned to be good at, but it didn't really meet what we wanted to do. And ultimately, the way I describe it is that I would say that we have an amazing story, but it was missing a strategy, okay? That's how I describe our situation. I won't go into the details in this, but basically our distribution planning fell short. And those of you who have made films and things like that can understand how that happens. What basically happened is we placed a high priority on great quality content. We neglected to place as high a value on distribution, follow-up, and engagement with our audience. It's who we were as storytellers. It was my passion to make a great film. It was not as much my passion to see it reach an audience, and it's something I had to learn from. So, I'm a true believer in some ways, but I'm also a skeptic in some ways in all of the hype that surrounds story and all the hype that surrounds technology. And what I want to think about is challenging my own thinking about it, both in its strengths and its weaknesses and the magic of it, and really ground it in something so there's less magic, but it integrates to a greater degree. I want to share another story. Some of you know Frank Preston, who's a media strategist, a colleague of mine, and some of this stuff is stuff that I sort of translate from Frank, because this is a story that Frank shared in a blog post. He calls it Bob's Secret Sauce, and it's based on a minister in Southeast Asia in a very hostile environment, highly unreached place. Radio was the preferred technology. They did simple programs. They did things like news event programs. They did community development things that would help the community, okay? Short little simple programs on the radio. And they had them at the end, or sometime during the show, one of the things he said was, hey, why don't you share your birthday? And when it's your birthday, I think they must have had to write in somehow, text in, mail in, share your birthday, and when it's your birthday, we'll read your name on the radio. Get together with your friends and gather around the radio. His goal, he knew what he strategically wanted to do. He wanted to gather people together. He could not broadcast any Christian content on this, or he'd get kicked out of the country, so there's no Christian content on the radio program. But his goal was to gather them together to listen to broadcasts and invite others. And so when we look at this, we have to ask ourselves, so what was the key to his success? Was it great stories? Well, honestly, it wasn't. He was not a great storyteller. He was not very creative. Great images? It was radio. Chris Singh would say, we form images in our minds, right? So it wasn't amazing technology or high tech or new or anything like that. What was it? What did he do? He shared about birthdays, which was this simple, crazy little idea, and what he did was provide a way for them to gather together. So strategy, what this teaches us is that strategy, and especially follow-up, is more important than amazing content, is the thing that I try to take away from some of this, okay? The key to his success was not the amazing content that he created, but the fact that he created for a reason for people to connect around birthdays, and that was toward the larger goal he had. His goal was not to just have people listen. His goal was something very specific, gathering. And in the end, he had hundreds of groups gathering in this place, which those of you who know or try to gather groups in difficult places is really hard to do. He had hundreds of groups gathering, and it wasn't because it was great content, it's because he gave them a reason to get together, forming the foundation for the ministry he ultimately wanted to do. So the takeaway I get from that is that stories are not the most important thing, although they are important. But stories that lead to engagement at a significant level are what we want to aim for, not just stories, okay? So as I think about imagining all this stuff, I think about experiences that I've had, for instance, in film festivals. So filmmakers often don't get to really experience what the audience experiences in their films. They can see the box office numbers going up if they're released in theaters or going down or something like that. But film festivals are one of the places where I love to go as a filmmaker because I get to sit with an audience who isn't or aren't my friends and family, watching a movie that I made, and then usually at festivals we do panel discussions and Q&A and stuff like that. And I was at a film festival with The Enemy God, with that film, which is an indigenous film. We were at an indigenous film festival in Santa Fe, New Mexico. All of the other filmmakers were Native American or native peoples from other countries. We were the only white filmmakers in the crowd, which made us feel really awkward because most of these films, especially Native American filmmakers, are making films about white Protestant missionaries who committed genocide against their people. And I'm completely in sympathy with that, but I'm sitting here thinking, I'm the white, they don't know this, but I'm the white Protestant missionary guy. And there's this Hopi guy sitting across from breakfast with me one day, Hopi Indian, which is one of the Indian tribes in the southwest of the United States. And he's a filmmaker, he's an older man, and he was so angry with us when he found out who we were, like what film we had, and there was these white guys telling a spiritual story of an indigenous people. We are the wrong people to be doing this. I tried to explain how it came about, that we were doing it at the request of the indigenous people and trying our best and everything. What was really interesting is that that engagement around our story over several days at the festival led to us becoming sort of friends at the end. He eventually sort of softened and just kind of said, well, maybe at least these guys are just ill-informed, but they're not bad people or something. He actually invited me to come to the reservation to teach young people at the end of the film festival, turning from antagonism. That story and that real-life event, that's what I want to replicate in the digital world. So we get these conversations going around stories that then lead to real-life relationships and real-life change. So here's the phrase. If we can think of a new way of thinking about it, it's not that stories don't matter. It's can we wrap our stories in strategy or wrap our content and strategy. I'll give a shout out to Scott Santee for the idea for the little gift wrap box. I won't really have time to talk about that, but Scott suggested that. Wrapping stories in strategy means something like this. We want a media strategy that does two things. It evaluates audiences for content, messages, and questions we present. Okay, so audience. The second one is it engages those audiences in ways that are distinct to the people and the time and the place and the technologies that they use. Okay? It is not enough to say, if we build it, they will come. Okay? Filmmakers are always doing that. We are idea people, and we just step out in faith. And God, I don't make rules about anything. I like paradigms and things, but I know God does crazy things that are completely against my better judgment, and then I do things that are against his better judgment. But if we build it, they will come is not a strategy, honestly, and I want to encourage us not to be in that mode. So, for instance, if we start with imagining a persona, an individual, so, if you're into social media, you've heard of audiences and personas and things like that. So the idea is we start with a person. We think about the channels that person uses commonly to engage with their content, mobile, in a lot of places in the world now. Ways we can engage using that specific technology, right? And then we imagine our stories. Can I encourage us to think in this sort of a framework? For instance, I'll give you an example. A religious man in Yemen who's a father, he is thinking about the issue of child marriage. He's got a young daughter who is marriageable age. Child marriage, arranged marriages is a thing. And it's somewhat controversial in the Muslim world in some places, right? It causes, there's issues with it. He and other members of his family use Facebook and social media on the internet. So we know how we can target, we can post things, we can do ads, we can interact with him or a person like this via comments on Facebook, if Facebook is the channel that he uses. And so then we ask ourselves the question, what kind of visual story could we create to encourage that conversation? So I'm going to play. Is the video hot?
Who is responsible? Family? Society? Or religion?
That is a video that we did probably about 3 or 4 years ago. Not complicated, didn't take a lot of time to shoot, not epic production value, things like that. But it was created for a very specific persona. What was really interesting about that is the interaction we got around that. Arab Muslim websites asked if they could post that video on their websites. People were really, it's a subject that really hit home. It was targeted at Yemenis, people abroad, people in Yemen. And it was really interesting to see the engagement around that because it started with an issue that we knew that they were thinking about. Lots and lots of views on YouTube and things like that, lots of interactions, but the kinds of engagement in terms of even being somewhat viral, it wasn't massively viral, but among certain audiences that we cared about, it really was. And so, I'm afraid even in my own ministry work, it's like it's a hard thing to do this because sometimes it's the reverse. This is the reverse of how we normally do it. We may be starting out with a story idea and then reverse engineering. I'm not saying that it's completely invalid to do that. I think sometimes this happens synergistically and simultaneously, but it's very easy for people, especially like me who are storytellers, or we have a very core message we want to give like the scriptures. We start with that and then just make assumptions without really building the strategy. So here's another way to look at it. Be sure the story content, the story and the story content serves the ministry goal that serves the ministry mission and vision. Usually they're interim goals. It's starting a conversation. It's doing other things. So, for instance, we don't necessarily measure how much people like our content, right? We know this. I think the message of engagement and the fantasy of likes, views, unique visitors, all this stuff, satellite footprints back in the day, those numbers are really not that meaningful. And so we want to avoid getting hung up on those, but what if we focus our measurement so we focus on our real goal? So for instance, an interim goal in a person's process of conversion. What if we focus on things like people in scripture study groups and we say, that's the thing we measure? Or for instance, multiplying disciples and churches as the only thing that we measure. I've talked with some people in North Africa who have been doing this for a couple of years, and some of you know this case study in North Africa. When I talk with them about how the change that they made in their strategy, they said the biggest thing that they did as a ministry to engage. This is a very resistant country. It's a Muslim world in North Africa. It's always hard. They said that when they started only caring about multiplying disciples and multiplying churches, it changed everything they did. It's not that they didn't ever measure views, likes. That was a piece of that, but they only cared about the only thing that told them they were doing it right or they were succeeding or bearing the right fruit was multiplying disciples, second-generation churches. And they said that was the thing that they really wanted to care about, and that made a huge difference in them because that was their mindset. They weren't rejoicing. It's funny. He told me I was talking to him on Skype, and he said, "We really don't even count baptisms." You know, it's like, well, it's not that they don't care about baptisms, but what they really care about is reproducing disciples, because that means the church and the kingdom is really coming to that place. It's a different level. So that was a big thing for them. So I just want to leave you with this. Wrap your stories in strategy, because it's the way we can see the fruit we want to see, ultimately, in our ministries. So we've got a couple of questions, and I think we're going to go right into questions. Okay. There's a couple of questions you guys can discuss around your tables. To what degree does the content my ministry creates or uses reflect this idea? So you might be a consumer of media, right? You're applying things that come to you, and you're searching for media you can use in your context, or you're a content creator, and you have stuff to provide to people. To what degree does it reflect the idea of beginning with an engagement strategy as you're thinking about it or using it? And what might we be able to change based on this idea? So I just want to throw that out there. 7 minutes. Do you want to have that include discussion? So maybe 5 minutes around the table. 5 minutes around the table, and then I'll come back up, and you can throw out some ideas and ask questions and challenge me and stuff. Benjamin's going to grab a mic and run around and throw it around. I would love to hear just sort of your impressions, answers to this, questions, things like that. We got a couple minutes to do a quick little debrief. Anybody feel like they want to comment or question or...
This was enlightening for me, because I've always been on the distribution side for secular as well as Christian media for now 25 plus years. So I've always been trying to help people get eyeballs or ears. And now I'm realizing that if you don't think strategically at the very beginning, you do have the roadblocks when it hits people like me, and people are saying to me, help us partner, help us get licensing, help us distribute, because no one thought at the beginning strategically about how they might want to use the content. So by the time you then figure it out, the people you may need to get consents from or collaborations from, they're scattered all over the world. And so it's too hard then to connect dots. So I see now why the strategic piece is so critical, because trying to do it on the back end or after the fact is incredibly difficult.
Right, yeah, especially the legal stuff. So that's a whole nother...
And this is not whether you're trying to make money or anything, yeah. But just because you have indigenous people who may have ownership, or at least have, that you're trying to empower to, still keep ownership of it, and you want to respect that.
Yeah, good. I think we have time for one more, actually. We're going to cut it short.
I just really appreciated the story, how you were saying that film was received by the community simply because it was the issue that they were already talking about. Right away, it made me think of a WhatsApp group that I'm a part of. Actually, I left the WhatsApp group in Sierra Leone because it was just flooding me with all these forwards. I don't have time for this, and I left the WhatsApp group. Now I actually want to go back in there and see what are all these things that I don't have time for that everybody's talking about, and to use that as potential content for something.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that.
All right. Thank you. Little word of affirmation for Tom, or applause. Thank you.
You need audio?
Yes.